And the bhakta is conquered by the Lord giving himself to the devotee. Having spoken of this sort of sweet aspect of the Lord, now in 3 verses, the Lord's opulence is glorified. So let's look at that. I'm gonna read the translation. Like I said, this particular stuti, the meter. Here's a translation. My dear Lord, this cosmic manifestation and its creation, maintenance, and annihilation are all but your opulences. So Tava Vibhava, Kalu Bhagavan, Jagat, the universal creation, maintenance, and dissolution. This is the Tava Vibhava. This is the greatness of Bhagavan. His greatness is perceived in the acts of becoming, maintenance, and dissolution. Okay, next part. Since Lord Brahma and the other creators are nothing but small portions of a portion of you, does not make them God, Ishvara. Their consciousness of themselves as separate lords is therefore merely false prestige. So Vishwa Srijas te Anksha Ankshas. So the universal creators, Vishwa Srijas, such as Lord Brahma or Lord Shiva, this is a reference to them. They are Anksha Ankshas. They are Anshas of your Anksha. So the Anksha Bhagavan is Paramatma. And the Paramatma, he will be having his own Ankshas, the Guna avatars like Brahma and Shiva. So they're called as Anksha Anksha for this reason. And they may have the self-notion of being creators. So this is Abhimatya. This Abhimatya, like this Abhiman, of being a creator, like an independent creator. But their power to create is derivative. It is not intrinsic to them, but it is derived from a source creator, and that source creator is God, Ishvara. And their power to create is derivative. And of course, Prabhupada takes it, further to the creators of various wonderful things in this material world. They may be creating technologies, they may be creating so many things, but their creation, their power. And so when you look at the first cause of that derivative power, that first cause is ultimately God. And therefore the glory for any creation ultimately goes to God himself. That's what he wants to say. That's what Prabhupada is wanting to bring out at least. So people, they like to receive glorification for, but from where they have gathered the ingredients, so Prabhupada brings up that point, the ingredients for creating, that is also coming from. Simply take those ingredients and assemble them, as does Lord Brahma, for example, in the secondary creation. But the ingredients are coming from some other source. And the faculties that you have for assembling the ingredients, that is also coming from another source. Buddhindriya Manoprana, Asher Jadanam Asher Jat Prabhu. Is it breaking up for others? I don't know.
Yes, it's breaking for me also.
Oh my God, dude. I'm kind of over the internet, honestly. What is the point?
Move to New York.
Huh?
Should we all move to New York?
Let us all move to Vrindavan. Why are we wasting time in America also? Hold on, let me save. Yeah, the TBC's internet has been really shoddy. Okay, I switched it. Is it better? Hare Krishna, Hare Ram, Jaya Krishna Balaram. Okay. So yeah, whatever anyone is creating is derives from some other source. The materials that they're assembling to create the intelligence that they are required to have in order to create, that is also given by a source Vastu, Krishna. Undindriya Manopranam Jananam Ashaya Prabhu. From where you've gathered the intelligence, from where you've gathered the senses and all that, this is also coming from some source. So whatever power there is to create, and any one of us, that is a derivative power, whose source is the Supreme Lord. Therefore, ultimate glory goes to the Supreme Lord. Why are you having abhiman that you're doing anything? So tatra vishra spardhanti pratak abhimatya. So this abhiman of these universal creators, where they're thinking that they're separate creators, that is all false, Marisha. This is all false or in vain. It has no actual meaning. All the glory of the creation goes to the personality of Godhead. That's the idea here. Nature itself is moving in these cycles of becoming, being, and dissolution. And Krishna speaks about this in the Gita, of course, in chapter 14, chapter 17, chapter 18. And we derive we have three types of happiness based on this also, right? Rajas, Sattva, and Tamas, three types of happiness. So the happiness of Rajas is the happiness of becoming something. That's the happiness that is considered standard for the material civilization today. And then you have the happiness of being, which is largely forgotten about in the postmodern world, but happiness that derives from what you are, or what you are, who you are. That is the happiness that is derived from Sattva, the happiness of being. And there's also the happiness of dissolution. For example, like going to sleep, that's a great happiness in this material world. Or the happiness of shedding the old skin, shedding the old layers of things. And then it's the happiness of dissolution. So all this becoming, being, and dissolution, that is ultimately rooted in God. And so our happiness derived from becoming, being, and dissolution, that is also rooted in God. Therefore, all glory to God. That is the basic, thrust of the prayer. All glory to God. And all the states of our psyche, which goes through this motion of nature, and all the phases of nature that also goes to this motion, that is all due to the Supreme Lord, and therefore all glory be to him. That is the idea here. Next verse, the same idea. So he's the source for creation, maintenance, dissolution. And he exists in all time, and he exists in all space. So this verse 36 is God who exists in all time. And verse 37 is God who exists in all spaces. So here's the translation. You exist in the beginning, middle, and end of everything, from the most minute particle of a cosmic manifestation, the atom, to the gigantic universes and total material energy. Nonetheless, you are eternal, having no beginning, end, or middle. You are perceived to exist in these three phases, and thus you are permanent. When the cosmic manifestation does not exist, you exist as the original potency. So you, Twam Adyantara Bharti, you're existing in the beginning, middle, and end of this process of becoming, being, and stasis. Before there's this whole cycle, as it is related to nature, then you are there before that, and you are there at the beginning of it. You're there during that whole being process, and you're also there at the dissolution process. From Paramanu Parama Mahata, from the time of the smallest atom to which, in other words, the most subtle cause, to the big effect that is this universe, you are there. You are that entity that exists in all phases of time. And you are that entity that is without beginning, middle, and end. So you are the Dhruvam. Ya Dhruvam te evantarale. You are the Dhruvam. So Dhruvam means you are the permanent object. Whereas everything that is coming into being and staying for some time and then coming out of being, they are the impermanent object. But you are the permanent object. So this is also part of the glory of God. He is there at all phases of time, and therefore he should be glorified at all times. Next verse. He's there in all spaces. Yeah. So every universe is covered by 7 layers: earth, water, fire, air, sky, the total energy, and false ego, each 10 times greater than the previous one. So that is the first line of the verse. Shiti adibir esha kilavrita, sapta bir dasha guno tarair andakosha. So andakosha refers to the universal egg. This universal egg is composed of the Shiti Adibi. Shiti means earth, etc. So the earth element, then the water element, the fire element, then the air element, the sound element, then the manas element, and then the ahankar element, and then the buddhi element or mahatattva element. So these elements are said to be, there's the elements when combined, they generate all the cosmos that we see, the objects that we see. But also around the egg are like these, they also form the shell of the egg. So first there's the earth element, and then 10 times thicker than that is the water element. If you study the Srimad Bhagavatam Rita, you'll hear about Gopal Kumar passing through these, what do you want to call it? Like layers or sheets of the sort of raw elemental substance. And they all have presiding deities in each of those domains, and they're worshipped by the, I think they're called the Anjana Devatas. They're the like personified forms of these raw elements, and they're worshiping a particular aspect of Bhagavan. So in any case, the Lord is, this is a description of the Andakosha, the Brahmanda. And then he says, there are innumerable universes besides this one, and although they are unlimitedly large, they move about like atoms in you. Therefore, you are called unlimited. So these universes are quite big, but anu yatra patiti anu kalpaha, they're moving like atoms in the Supreme Lord. Of course, we hear when he exhales, then all these Brahmanas are coming out. When he inhales, all these Brahmanas are enfolded back into the Lord. And therefore, he is unlimited, able to be the shelter for unlimited universes. So he is that personality who is existing in all spaces. So this is the glory of God. In 3 verses, he has glorified God. So now why is this important? So in 2 verses, he wants to glorify the devotee. But first, he criticizes the non-devotee who fails to recognize this glory of the Lord. So this is the next verse, 2 verses that glorify, their intention is to glorify the devotee, but first a setup point is made by criticism of the non-devotee. So this is verse number 38. O Lord, O Supreme, unintelligent persons who thirst for sense enjoyment and who worship various demigods are no better than animals in the human form of life. Because of their animalistic propensities, they fail to worship your lordship, and instead they worship the insignificant demigods who are but small sparks of your glory. So Vishaya Trisho, those who are thirsty for Vishaya, sensual enjoyment, the sense objects basically. Nara Pashava, they are like man animals. They're only chasing after the, sensual enjoyments. They are like man animals. And well, what are they chasing? Ya upasite. They worship the vibhuti. So the vibhuti is here taken as a reference to the devatas. Just as the Lord has the Paramatma has his ankshas, and then there's the kalas, which are like, kalas means like the expansions of the amshas. And then you have the vibhutis, which means like the expansions of the kalas. And so these vibhutis are taken as the devatas. Also, though, the vibhutis can mean basically any great thing in nature. So they're worshiping the vibhuti, they're worshiping nature or the personified sort of forms of nature, the devatas, without recognizing the relationship of the vibhuti to the source of the vibhuti, the Bhagavan. So they worship nature as independent from God. So the result so they're called here as man animals because of that. They see some great source in them. There's no problem in recognizing some great source in nature. But when you see it as separate from God, then the relationship that you will tend to establish with it is one of exploitation. That is certainly the relationship with the Devata, where it's basically a mutual exploitation agreement. I will worship you, do the yagya, and in return, you should give me this. And in the case, this is a case of a pious culture. So even that culture, this is considered a fault from bhakti perspective. But it is a healthy fault. At least they recognize that there's some devata there and that he should be worshipped by the appropriate yagya. But it is a relationship of exploitation. As the sense of the vibhutis have become increasingly depersonalized, people don't believe in the religion anymore. And so they've depersonalized nature 100%. So the relationship is still one of exploitation. But now because they've depersonalized nature, there's no end to what they'll prepare to do to exploit nature. And of course, that program of exploitation turns into like a sort of madness of consumption. So first it starts with like conquest of regions and conquest of the rivers and conquest of, trees and all this. And then it turns into just devouring each other. There's no, how do you say, boundary to constrict the exploitative mentality. Previously in the religious culture, the boundary would be yagya. Okay, you want to enjoy it, but you have to do the yagya. Now they don't acknowledge a personified aspect of nature. So seeing it impersonally, they just exploit it. So these are the man animals who are thirsty for enjoyment. Naparamtvam. Naparamtvam means they do not recognize you, who are the supreme, or they do not recognize the relationship of the vibhuti to the supreme Lord. Okay, so then it says here, with the destruction of the entire universe, including the demigods, the benedictions received from the demigods also vanish, just like the nobility when a king is no longer in power. So whatever benedictions people get from their worship of the vibhutis, because those vibhutis are themselves temporary. So when the vibhutis perish, in this case taken as the devatas, when they perish, then whatever benedictions that were given by them, that also perishes. Just like if you're under some rulership, just like you may have lived in a temple, and under the temple president, you may have had some agreement that, you worked for this long and we'll give you this thing after so many years. But then before you get what you're supposed to get from the temple president, new management comes and they don't acknowledge that thing. They say, what is this nonsense? Now I'm in charge. We will not honor that. Then you feel very slighted. You feel betrayed. So like this, the nature of worship of nature without its relationship to God is that you will be betrayed. Actually, you're betrayed by your own desire in this sense. You get the betrayal of your own desire, or you're betrayed by your own misconception of nature without God, without its source. And so this is being criticized. Krishna also criticizes this in Bhagavad Gita quite a bit. The Sakama Bhakta, and we're going to hear about this interestingly in the next verse. The Sakama Bhakta is not criticized in Bhagavad Gita, although in the culture of Shuddha Bhakti, we're very heavy on the Sakama Bhakta. We say, what is the Sakama Bhakti? Bhukti Mukti Spriha Yapa Pishat Tuhidi Vartate. Bhukti Mukti is like a witch. How can the happiness of Bhakti come to a person who has desire for Bhukti Mukti? Culture of Shuddha Bhakti, a little bit heavy on the Sakama Bhakta. But in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna does not criticize the Sakama Bhakta. Actually, he says, Udhara Sarva Evaite. First, he talks about 4 types of devotees. 3 of them are Sakama Bhaktas. Only 1 of them is Nishkama. 3 of them are Sakama Bhaktas. But of all of them, he says, Udhara Sarva Evaite. He says, all of them are Udhara. Udhara means like broad, like broad-minded. Prabhupada translates it as magnanimous. He said, all of them are great souls, actually. All of them are Mahatmas because they do bhakti to me. Even though Shuddha Bhaktas, we will criticize Sakam Bhakta, but he actually says they're also nice. Of course, of the Nishkam Bhakta, he says that Nishkam Bhakta is like my very self. The Nishkam Bhakta is given a special position in Bhagavad Gita, but still the Sakam Bhakta is not criticized. And so Krishna's criticism later on in the same chapter, this is chapter 7 Bhagavad Gita. So in chapter 7, 17, he says that all these bhaktas are great, including the Sakam Bhakta. His criticism is actually of those who worship the vibhutis without worshiping him. And his criticism is precisely this, that if they have worshipped me, I forget the antava tu palante shanta bhavati alpamedasam. Those who worship the devatas, they have alpameda. That means they have little intelligence. What is their little intelligence there? If they had worshipped me, they could get something that was imperishable. Even the Sukha and Aishwarya, the spiritual world, that is imperishable. And they can get that thing by their Sakam Bhakti. They can get the Sukha, Aishwarya. They also have devotion for Lord, but they can get a realm in the spiritual world, where they can enjoy the Sukha and Aishwarya, the spiritual world, by their Sakam Bhakti. So Krishna wants to make that criticism that these people who worship the vibhutis, they are less intelligent because they don't know, because they're getting something that is antava tupalantisha, and the fruit is perishable. But whereas if they had done Sakam Bhakti to me, they can get an imperishable fruit. So therefore, I said they are not very intelligent. He's not saying that they're not very intelligent because they have material desires. He said they're not very intelligent because they don't repose those material desires in him. But the Sakama Bhaktas, they do that. They put the material desires, they get also the Krishna. And from that, in reciprocation with that sort of devotion, they get an imperishable result. So it's a very positive thing. Of course, Kosha Shuddha Bhakti will not glorify this, because our sadhya is prem bhakti. Our sadhya is the bhakti of the Brijbasi. So we'll not show too much appreciation for this. But this is a fact. So here the man animals are criticized for this reason. You worship the perishable. So while worshiping the perishable, you'll be filled with the anxiety, such as the nature of being threatened by the perishable. So the next verse, it wants to glorify the devotees by Kamutya Nyaya. So this verse is very interesting. I found it very interesting, at least. This is the last verse I'll do. O Supreme Lord, if person is obsessed with material desires for sense gratification, so kamadhiya, the first verse is a kamadhiya. Kamadhiya means their intelligence is infected with the kama. They have desire. That is natural. So if a person is obsessed with material desires for sense gratification through material opulence, worship you, who are the source of all knowledge and all transcendent and are transcendental to material activities or qualities. They're not subject to material rebirth, just as sterilized or fried seeds do not produce plants. Living entities are subjected to the repetition of birth and death because they are conditioned by material nature. But since you are transcendental, one who is inclined to associate with you is in transcendence, escapes the conditions of material nature. So here he's saying that if they are kamadhiya, chayirachita, but they perform worship of you, they perform the worship of you, then na rohanti. So na rohanti means that desire will not generate rebirth. That is the idea here. They have some material desire, but that material desire is reposed in Krishna. In other words, they do Sakam Bhakti. That is the idea. They do Sakam Bhakti. So it says Narohanti. So Narohanti means it doesn't produce the plant. Just like you have one seed, and out of the seed, the creeper is sprouting. There comes some sprout. But if this Sakam Bhakta worships you, there will not be the sprout of another material body. That is the sincere. And yata karamba bhijani. So an example is given. It is just like the seed that has been fried. So if you take some seeds and then you fry them, because you're making some sort of tasty, preparation or something with it. If you take that seed and you go and plant it, it will not produce the sprout because it's been fried. So in a similar way, if you have Sakam Bhakti and you offer that Sakama, whatever that desire is, you repose it in the Supreme Lord. That desire will not generate another body. That's what he's saying here. It is just like the fried seed. That desire will actually fructify into a perfected goal. The Lord is described here as the form of Gyan and transcendence. And those who worship him, they're not again overtaken by the network of dualities. So they say, well, that seems to be counterintuitive to all the stuff we've been hearing regularly in the culture of Shuddha Bhakti. How does this work out? So there's two ways. First of all, every bhakta that comes to Krishna is not interested in the highest sadhya that is propagated by Gaudiya Vaishnava. So that has to be kept in mind when hearing verses like this. Not everyone is interested in the culture of pure devotion as propagated by Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. Actually, the next few verses of the prayer of Chittaketu is going to make the point that the ability to offer this Nishkam Bhakti is a fruit of hearing Bhagavad Dharma from Krishna or his bhaktas. In other words, it seems that the general approach towards reality, Bhagavan, is a Sakama approach. That is almost natural because of our beginning this conditioning. And the ability to offer Nishkam Bhakti to the Supreme Lord is a fruit of hearing Bhagavad Dharma from the Supreme Lord or his bhaktas. And so in this way, he conquers by the sound vibration of Srimad Bhagavatam. He's able to conquer over those other desires and generate the desire for desireless devotion. And desireless devotion, again, means anya bilashita shunya, no other desire than desire for Krishna. Without hearing Srimad Bhagavatam, there could be no conquest over other desires. That's not possible. So because we've been hearing Srimad Bhagavatam from the very outset, we get this notion of Nishkam Bhakti, and that only Nishkam Bhakti is appropriate, other types of Bhakti is not appropriate. So reciprocation with that conception that has been gifted to us by bhaktas through their sharing of Srimad Bhagavatam, then when we approach the Lord with Sakam Bhakti, then he may have a different approach with us. His different approach, as we hear from 5th Canto, chapter 19, we've quoted this verse many times, is that when the Lord, it is true that when one approaches the Lord with material desires, he certainly fulfills those desires. But seeing that the devotee is not satisfied by the fulfillment of the desire, again, the devotee will want to approach the Lord with other desires. So the Lord says, why should I give this guy this desire when that desire doesn't give him what he wants? Right? We discussed this verse many times. I think it's, 5:19-27. Satyam Dishtati. Anyway, I'm not pulling it up right now. If I give this fellow what he desires, that is not giving him what he wants. So I'll give him what he wants. And what he wants, of course, is, as we like to say, Atma Suprasidhati. He wants to satisfy a heart that comes from prema, because only that is congruent with the seed desire that has been gifted to him by Bhakta Sangha. You understand? You've heard from a certain level of Bhakta, they've turned you toward the reality in a particular way. They've given this Nishkama conception to you. So only something that is congruent with that desire will satisfy you in the end. This for our devotees, if we've heard from Shuddha Bhaktas, we don't feel satisfied with having material desires. Otherwise, what is the problem, honestly? You have some desires, you take that before the Supreme Lord, and he can satisfy that also. And here, the Sakam Bhakti is being glorified in the sense of the Kaimutya Nyaya. You know, the Kaimutya Nyaya is, if this, what to speak of that? If by Sakam Bhakti, you will not have to take birth again, because just as the burnt seed does not produce a sprout. So what then to speak of Nishkam Bhakti? And that will be, of course, glorified in the next verse. That is the sense of this particular verse. But that Nishkam Bhakti doesn't come unless you hear Bhagavad Dharma, basically, Srimad Bhagavatam. So we've heard Srimad Bhagavatam, so Nishkam conception has come inside our psyche. And that Nishkam conception not allowing us to feel satisfied with material desires. Otherwise, you see in other religions, sometimes I think like this, let me join Christianity and be peaceful. Because there you can do whatever you want, just believe in Jesus and be peaceful. Why should be disturbed having joined Krishna conscious movement and all my desires are like my enemies and they make me feel sad and unhappy and depressed? Better I join Christianity or Islam or something like this and just have material desires and thank God for fulfilling my material. No. Now we've got Nishkam desires, so only something that is of the same category, like coherent with that, will satisfy our heart. So in this way, the Lord will, he reciprocates perfectly in accordance with the nature of our approach. So in this way, the Lord was glorified in 3 verses, and 2 verses, the Bhakta was glorified. Both Sakam Bhaktas glorify and Nishkama Bhakta glorify indirectly. Okay, I'm gonna pause there. I did the best I could this morning. It's been rough because I had to go to sleep past midnight because of an extenuating circumstance that I'm still tending to today. Okay, let's see. Would this small derivative of power be considered vibhuti? Yes. It's like Krishna says that, of aquatics, I'm the shark. Of the Vedas, I'm the Samaveda, which most beautiful part, apparently, because of the song, the various hymns in there. Anything wonderful you see in this world is ultimately a vibhuti of the Supreme Lord. So you'll see this like in Gaur Lila when Sanatana Goswami gets busted. He quits his job and he keeps telling that he's sick. And so the Nawab Hussain Shah is a little skeptical about this. So he comes and he just breaks into the house of Sanatana Goswami in an untimely way. And Sanatana Goswami living his best life with other Brahmanas discussing Srimad Bhagavatam. So the Nawab Hussain Shah, very disturbed by this, he said, "What is this?" He said, "You were sick." And he said, yeah, I'm living my best life. So Nawab Hussain Shah arrests him for this. This is his story out of the pit of the situation he was in. Anyway, reason I'm quoting this is that when the Nawab Hussain, suddenly shows up, all the Brahmanas in Sanatana Goswami, they immediately stand up to honor him. And Prabhupada gives a nice comment there. They said because he was a leader of the land, he was embodying a vibhuti of the Lord, and they were honoring that vibhuti that he was embodying, even though he himself was not respectable. But because somehow or other, by arrangement of God, he is in that particular position. So they were showing respect to that vibhuti of the Lord that was manifested in that small way. So yeah, all of this is derivative power. So any type of power, even the little ant carrying 30 times its weight on its back, we consider vibhuti. Yeah, absolutely. What is considered under total material energy and its false ego, the Mahatattva. A total material energy, I think, is the translation for Mahatattva, or else Pradhan. And false ego is not the Mahatattva. The Mahatattva is the first evolute out of Pradhan. Pradhan is the nature and equilibrium. And then time enters and they start combining and recombining. And the first evolute out of Pradhan is called the Mahatattva. It's like cosmic intellect. The Mahatattva is localized in the subtle body of the jiva as the chitta. And so it's the first element through which consciousness is interfacing with matter. It is like the lens through which consciousness can perceive matter. That's called Mahatattva. And then out of that Mahatattva, the next evolute to come is false ego. So when consciousness looks through the lens of Mahatattva, the first thing it sees is false ego, basically, in a localized manner. So there are two different elements there. Harisham says, speaking of man animals, one 15-year-old girl in India drugged and stabbed her father to death because she was upset that he took her cell phone and told her to stop hanging out with boys. Yikes. Hare Krishna, Hare Ram. How do you not get another material body if you perform Sakam Bhakti? That is the gift of Bhakti Yoga to Krishna. So that's what we're hearing here. You have not yet perfected your life yet. Also, jivas born in Bhakti families assume maybe we're Sakam Bhaktas in past life have not yet completely perfected lives yet. So there are different types of perfection. So the perfection that we normally hear about in Gaudiya Vaishnava is Prem Bhakti. So we tend to take anything that is not Prem Bhakti to be not perfection. That's how we speak about it, especially emotionally speaking. When I say emotion, like the Bhavuka purport, anything that is not Prema is bogus, basically. So Brahmananda, that is also bogus. Brahmananda is the true attainment. It is a true attainment. What's wrong with Brahmananda? Still, we will say it is bogus thing. And Vaikuntha attainment, that is also a genuine attainment. That thing we also almost say is bogus. We don't say quite bogus. We say, okay, it's not so faulty. But that is also, what is this Vaikuntha devotion? Like this, Bhavuka purport. So by the mixed forms of bhakti, one can attain Vaikuntha, some Vaikuntha liberation. And there they can enjoy Sukha Aishwarya Purna. Not Aishwarya Purna, but what do I want to say? From Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he informs us that there's the types of siddhas who primarily, are kind of distant from Bhagavan, and they enjoy the Sukha and Aishwarya of the spiritual world. Sukha Shrotara Muktas, they're called. Muktas, who are predominated by the desire for Sukha and Aishwarya. Srila Rupa Goswami informs us of that. That means they also have prema, but there's a large thing of Sukha Aishwarya there for them. Then he says there's the Premutara Muktas, the Muktas who have a predominance of prema, but a little bit of that Sukha Aishwarya is there for them also. And then he says there's the Ekantika devotees. So those who are Ekantika, they have their Sukha Aishwarya is nil, Anya Bilashita Shunya. That is zero. And so these are the three levels of muktas that it seems are encountered in the spiritual world. So these are different types of perfections. And anything short of the prema bhakti perfection, we will speak a little bit heavy on, but that is also a type of perfection. So, so you're saying Gyan Mishra Bhakti, Karma Mishra Bhakti, etc., is considered perfect? No, those are paths to perfection, a particular type of Vaikuntha liberation. So that bhakti can give them a particular type of Vaikuntha liberation. They become muktas. Mukta means liberated out of the material body. So yes, and also the Maya intellect will be grouped with the Chitta. No, so Chitta is one element. Then from there's the Ahankara. Then from Ahankara with goodness, there comes the Manas element, that is the mind. From the Ahankara with Rajagun comes the Buddhi element. So that is different in Bhagavad philosophy. And Samkhya philosophy of like Yoga Sutra, for example, Mahatattva and Buddhi are like the same element basically. But in Bhagavad Sankhya that you encounter in Srimad Bhagavatam, then Buddhi is the result of Ahankara with Rajaguna. And then you have the Ahankara with the Tamaguna, and that produces the Tamatras and the Mahabhutas. So that is how that thing works there. Okay, people feel averted to join Krishna consciousness because of accepting for regs, not necessarily material desires. Well, too bad. I devotees don't have to necessarily push the four regs. You have to do the four regs to be a devotee. That isn't true. You can be a devotee without following four regular principles. What is the problem? To be a devotee means to remember Krishna. So if you're doing that, remembering Krishna, especially by doing the angas of bhakti such as Shravan, Kirtan, and all that, then as a result of the purification that comes from that, then you'll give up these other things. Purity is the sequel. Purity is a sequel to bhajan kriya. It is not the prerequisite for it. So devotees, we often tend to overemphasize the life of virtue as some sort of prerequisite for the culture of bhakti. And as a result of that, we may end up turning a lot of people off, especially in the age of Kali, where everyone's lives is so much fettered by vice of some sort, either known or in secret. The lives are completely entrenched in vice. So we keep pushing a life of virtue in order to do bhakti, then naturally people will be quite discouraged from embracing bhakti because they'll say, well, how I will become so virtuous that I could do it. Rather, we should just preach bhakti yoga, just do bhakti. And then as they get purified and they start themselves inquiring about so many things, then you can give, appropriate instruction. This is why bhakti really works best under the guidance of a guru. This whole uniform preaching is retarded. I'm going to say that right now. Giving a sort of standardized, it's just the, industrial revolution consciousness. Industrial revolution is concerned about mass production. And because of that, all the products have to be uniform. There could be no deviation in the product. So with that sort of psyche, we've also become preachers. We're largely concerned with mass production and creating a uniform product. the devotee that looks exactly the same as every other devotee. And as a result of that, we end up doing a lot of harm, and in a certain sense, a lot of violence. So everyone needs a teacher finally to tend to their unique circumstances of consciousness or unique circumstances of life. And then accordingly, you give instruction. But if you just have to be like the regular devotee and you just go and ask anyone, hey, and I'm having this issue or that issue, and then they just give a standardized answer. Well, you got to follow the 4 regular principles, and you got to chant 16 rounds, and you got to go to the Mongol arti, and then this will happen. People will not come. They'll not be able to make any progress. So bhakti works best under a teacher, obviously. So that's why the progress is so slow and the turnover rate is so high, because a lot of us are not getting the appropriate guidance for our unique circumstances. So we're forced to speculate, and then that gets complicated. How that cookie crumbles. And okay, and then there's yesterday, our Narendra Prabhu spoke on glories of Narendra Prabhu and read the letter that was found posthumously. Letter was like, "Oh Radha, make me a worm in Braja, wiggling in sewage, then give me resident of Vaikuntha." Yeah. So yeah, that is a Babuka devotees. They think like this. Where did he get this letter, Sham Gopi? Where did he give this, Sham Gopi? Is it Chicago? That is a question for Harishan and Sham Gopi. Desires for pure bhakti is also rare as the attainment. Yes, if it is coming at all, it is coming as a fruit of Shravana. Another call for a non-fanatical teacher. The teacher can be fanatical also. The teacher just has to be someone who speaks to your heart. That's the point. He can be a fanatic also. There's no problem there. But it has to be someone that can inspire your faith and help you to grow it. That's all. That is the only qualifier. That is why the culture of hearing from like everyone, it doesn't ultimately work. We do it in our temples. Okay, everyone gets a chance, but it doesn't work to help the culture of faith. You hear from one fellow, have one conception, hear from another fellow, has another conception. And neither one is speaking to your heart for whatever reasons. Krishna has manifested himself as Guru Tattva in many forms to speak to the unlimited types of jivas and their psychologies. So you just need to find a guru that speaks to you, to your heart situation, and helps to nourish your faith, inspire you, helps to help you move you progressively. For some of us, it has to be a quote non-fanatical guru. For others, a fanatical one works very well also. It just has to be someone who is able to speak to your faith or inspire it. Harishan said he had a question above. I guess I missed it by accident. No, I read that one. Harishan, I think I'm firmly situated in unalloyed Sakkhan Bhakti with no contamination of pure desires. Does this mean that my material desires are born of offenses? Because according to what we heard today, all my desires are burned away due to my Sakkhan Bhakti. Well, it didn't say that. It says that Nodar Hanti means that those desires will not lead to another body. That's what he was trying to say. It will not sprout another body because those desires are reposed in the Supreme Lord. So that's what we hear. That's what we were hearing from the verse today. So like I said, because of receiving a certain conception of bhakti and therefore having a certain approach towards bhakti, Krishna may have his unique way of reciprocating with us. Sakkhan Bhakti is not appropriate for us because that is not how we've been gifted. That is not congruent with the gift that we've been given. So Krishna may have his own unique way of reciprocating with us. So that is a verse that I was sharing from the 5th canto, chapter 19, that this fellow keeps approaching me with these desires, but he's not getting what he wants. So I'm going to take matters into my own hand and forcibly give him my lotus feet. So this could mean a lot of things, life falling apart, et cetera, et cetera. Krishna has his own ways of bringing us closer to him. Okay. All right, someone else was there. I think Gail has a question.
Actually, I'm sorry. Never mind.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like
Okay. Okay, so nothing there. Okay, anyone else wants to say anything? Otherwise we can.
Hare Krishna, I have a question. That in the case of Nishkama Bhakti, I saw sort of the process. There's a 9 stages of bhakti through which one goes through and then reaches the stage of prema. And but what happens in the case of Sakam Bhakti? Because their desires are not getting completely cleaned out, they still keep the desire and still achieve prema. So what is their ladder of achieving prema? I'm just wondering, like how they make to Vaikuntha. It seems like their path is much more simpler than or there's some different route there.
Okay, you can take up Sakam Bhakti then. Acharyas, they have not given teachings on Sakam Bhakti. So we cannot comment much on that. Other than to say that the approach, Sakam Bhakti is the general approach towards reality. And Shuddha Bhakti approach is a unique approach. But that is what is given in the Bhagavatam. So Dharma Projita Kaitava Traparama Nirmasarana. So no other Dharma is being glorified in the Srimad Bhagavatam. So our whole concept of bhakti is coming from that. And so this Sakam Bhakti has not been delineated, but it has been ridiculed as Kaitava Dharma. Sakam Bhakti is also ridiculed as Kaitava Dharma in the Srimad Bhagavatam for the most part. Even the verse that we heard today, that verse is a glorification of Nishkam Bhakti through the Kaimutya Nyaya. That even if these fellows can get this sort of result, then what to speak of Nishkam Bhakti. In the same way that Ajamil's story of the fruit that he got from Namabas is a glorification of shining purely, Shuddha, Nam, so to speak. That if by Namabas this comes, then what to speak of Shuddha Nam. Same with the fruit that Putana got. By her Bhakti Abbas, she showed up as a devotee. And she got an amazing result, but that was Bhakti Abbas. There was no true devotion there. So she got an amazing result. So by that, she can get this amazing result. What to speak of Bhakti proper. So in this way, Bhagavatam is making glorification. And that's the Bhakti that we know about. This Sakam Bhakti, we're not hearing so much about that. You can do some research, maybe go to the other Madhva line, Ramanuja line. I think they have a lot more room for Sakam Bhakti over there. So if you want to learn about that, you go to them. But in Gaudiya Vaishnavas, they don't have so much tolerance for that. Athena, I think that was my question about how could Sakam Bhakti not produce another body? That means separation, but clearly not. Here, Sakam Bhakti, Krishna's, like I quoted the verse from Bhagavad Gita also, Antavatupalavasation, on 723. So this mixed bhakti can lead to liberation. That is the point. So mixed bhakti means Sakam Bhakti. Sometimes mixed bhakti also means support to the culture of Shuddha Bhakti. So we'll hear about that for those who are after the high sadhya of Krishna Prema. But they may take shelter of mixed bhakti in the beginning stages to support their culture of, cultivating pure bhakti. Otherwise, mixed bhakti is there, can get up to liberation. Like these Vaikuntha liberations. So because we only hear from Srimad Bhagavatam, which is criticizing Sakam Bhakti for the most part, therefore this may come off as alarming to us. Just as it is alarming to bhaktas that an impersonalist can merge into Brahman and be there forever, because that's what he wanted. Through sadhana bhakti. He gives up Gyan, and then he does sadhana bhakti, and that sadhana bhakti takes him to Brahman, and he experiences Brahmananda. So the devotees find this to be shocking. This is also a possibility, but it is criticized. It is particularly criticized in Srimad Bhagavatam as abominable. So because of that mood, we become astonished to hear these things. But actually, such as the magnanimity of the Supreme Lord. Yaya mam prapadyante tam shataiva mujamya. Amavartmana vartate manusha parta sarvashna. Such is his generosity. And it means eventually you will not take another body. That process is started for you. Doesn't mean necessarily directly next life. Yeah, who can know these things but the Supreme Lord? Who can know when or who is coming back, when coming back, if not coming back, and so on. But yes, eventually, this life or some other life. Okay, anyone final?
Yeah, so Prabhu, just to clarify on this point, a Sakam Bhakta, his karma will be for his personal desire, but never in this material realm, only in the spiritual realm, isn't it?
He has desire for sukha and aishwarya, like any natural conditioned soul will be having desire. So that is also available in the spiritual world. But the sukha aishwarya available in the spiritual world is imperishable. So if you've done bhakti, Krishna, it's just as it says, if Krishna wants to give with his 10 hands, what can you hold with your 2? So you've done Sakam Bhakti, you're done Bhakti to Krishna, and you're interested in Sukha and Aishwarya. So Krishna gives with his 10 hands, Vaikuntha liberation, Jaya. One can enjoy Sukha and Aishwarya. But some distance from the Lord and Vaikuntha, not close, intimate associate, because that's not what you wanted.
But what I'm saying though is that his desire for those things in this world, shouldn't that be eliminated? Shouldn't that have to be vanquished before he goes like?
I can't say. I don't know all the tattva behind mixed bhakti. This whole idea of vanquishing other desires is for the culture of praying bhakti that we're a part of. Other desires, so in this verse, Anya Bilashita Shunyam, right? Other desires should be 0. This is the definition for what type of bhakti? Uttam bhakti, Shuddha bhakti. This whole, to qualify bhakti by calling it uttam or shuddha or kinshana or ananya or whatever word you want to use, means that there are other forms of bhakti also, right? That are not pure or mixed. So that is like those who do bhakti to attain Brahman. They also can attain Brahman by sadhana bhakti only. And they get the fruit of their worship. That is not uttam bhakti though. So by their bhakti, Sakam bhakti, they can get this other result. Does it? Well, don't they have to vanquish all the desires? I don't know if they have to. I don't know that tattva. That is not elaborated on. But my point is that their desires for Sukha and Aishwarya, that is their, the desire for Sukha and Aishwarya gets specified. Okay, I want this and I want that other thing because I think that will make me happy. But the general thing is desire for Sukha and Aishwarya. So Krishna can give imperishable Sukha Aishwarya. That is in Vaikuntha, he can give it imperishable. So he reciprocates with that desire for those who do that type of sadhana bhakti, with the desire, Sakam Bhakti. Okay, for your Sakam Bhakti, you get this imperishable result.
But don't we say, okay, what is sukha again? I'm sorry. Sukha.
What is what? Sukha means
Sukha?
happiness. Sukha means happiness.
Oh yeah. So when I thought that the cause of getting a material body is, right, having these material desires.
Yeah, and people have material
cause.
desires and they don't do bhakti. So they get the fruit of their material desires. But if you do bhakti,
in case of Dhruva Maharaj, what would you say? Was it bhakti nishkama or was it bhakti sakama?
This bhakti started out as Sakama bhakti, but by the association of Bhagavan or Bhakta, it became Nishkama. So that is, Rupa Goswami also brings this up in Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, in the Adhikar section. So after giving Adhikar for the culture of Shuddha Bhakti, he says that the 4 types of people mentioned in the Bhagavad Gita are not in the culture of Shuddha Bhakti. And then he gives examples. He says Gajendra is an example of the distress. Dhruva is the example of the wanting something material. Sonaka Rishi is the example of the inquisitive, and the Kumars are the example of the Gyani type. So they're considered outside the culture of Shuddha Bhakti. But then Rupa Goswami says, if they get the association of Bhagavan or Bhakta, and those desires are destroyed, then they get Shuddha Bhakti. So in the beginning, it was, Sakam Bhakti, and it became Nishkam by association of Narayana Muni. And of course, later on, the Supreme Lord. So I don't know how this mixed Bhakti Tattva stuff works exactly. But even we will be surprised to know that even some of us material desire, but they do Bhakti for Krishna. Akama sarvo kama va moksha kama udariti. Then they can get amazing results, like come to liberation. I'm sure you've heard many stories like this that are also a little bit astonishing. How souls getting these incredible results by bhakti, even though they seem to be like materialistic in nature. So our confusion is because we only hear about Shuddha Bhakti culture. So that's why we're getting confused. I'm also confused how this mixed Bhakti Tattva stuff works exactly. You mentioned that the Chitta in the Yoga Sutras is different from Chitta from the Bhakti paradigm. Yes. So when there are only 7 coverings to state in today's verse, I understand you correctly that the mind intellect then is grouped with them false ego here. Yeah, it can be grouped in different ways. Manas and mode of goodness, relationship to Ankara, Buddhi and mode of rajas, related to Ankara, yes. So that's also true. I don't know what the 7 elements mentioned there. So the Mahabhutas were mentioned. And then they'll use the word mind, and mind will encompass like manas, buddhi, and ahankar, and then mahatattva will be an element. So sometimes they divide it in different ways. You can divide it in unlimited ways practically, according to Krishna, to Uddhava. So yeah, the 7 are like that in this particular example given here. Okay. So we're going to pause there. Hari Om Tat Sat. Have a good day, everyone. And I'll try to also, even though I'm terribly sleep deprived. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai. Shri Gauri
Hare Krishna.
Jai Govinandi. Hari Bolo, Hari Bolo. Shri Krishna.